The evening started like any other busy night at the La Belle Rose restaurant, the kind of place where chandeliers hung like frozen fireworks and every dish looked like a work of art. The smell of roasted herbs and fresh bread filled the air, and the soft hum of conversations blended with the quiet clinking of wine glasses. At one of the corner tables sat a man who seemed to own the room without even trying. He was dressed in a dark tailored suit, the kind that spoke of old money and confidence. His name was Charles Davenport, a wealthy investor who had built his fortune in real estate and loved to show it off. He wasn't a cruel man by nature, but arrogance had become a habit for him. Everything in his world came easy: money, respect, and the attention of people who wanted to be in his good books. That night, Charles was hosting a private dinner for a few business partners. They had come to celebrate a big deal he had closed earlier that week. The table sparkled with bottles of fine wine, steak cooked to perfection, and laughter that carried the weight of too much money. The waiters moved quietly around them, keeping the glasses full and the plates spotless. Among them was a young woman named Lena Morales. She wasn't the kind of person who drew attention, and she liked it that way. Her uniform was neatly pressed, her dark hair tied back, and her eyes careful and kind. She moved quickly and quietly, remembering every order, every extra sauce, every glass that needed refilling. Lena had worked at La Belle Rose for almost 2 years. It wasn't her dream job, but it paid the bills, and there were many. Her mother was sick and needed treatment that cost more than Lena could ever afford on her own. Her younger brother was still in school, and she was determined to give him a better future, even if it meant working double shifts and going home with sore feet every night. That night she was exhausted but still smiling. That was something her co-workers admired about her. No matter how tough things got, she never lost her calm. She treated everyone with quiet respect, even when customers were rude or dismissive. As she approached Charles's table, she could tell the men were already tipsy. The laughter was louder, the jokes sharper, and the tone had shifted from polite conversation to drunken boasting. Charles was at the center of it all, leaning back in his chair, telling stories about his travels and business triumphs. The men around him nodded eagerly, laughing at every line. Just behind their table near the wall stood a grand piano. It was beautiful, black, polished, and silent. No one had played it in months. The restaurant had hired a pianist long ago, but ever since management cut costs, the piano had become more decoration than instrument. Charles noticed it as he lifted his glass for another toast. "You know," he said, pointing toward it, "that thing's been sitting there for months and not one person has touched it." "What a waste of a fine piano," one of his guests chuckled. "Maybe the staff can play us a tune. Give us some music for the night." The others laughed, thinking it was a joke, but Charles wasn't done. His eyes landed on Lena, who was just setting down a new bottle of wine. "What about you, miss?" he said in a teasing voice. "Can you play?" Lena froze for a second, caught off guard. "Oh no, sir," she said politely, trying to smile. "I haven't played in a long time." Charles grinned. "A long time, huh? That sounds like you can play. Come on, don't be shy. We could use some entertainment." The men at the table started to cheer her on, half joking, half curious. "Yes, come on, play something. Let's see if our waitress has hidden talents." Lena shook her head gently. "I really shouldn't. I still have tables to serve." She hoped that would end the conversation, but Charles wasn't the kind of man who liked being told no. He pulled out his wallet and placed a crisp $100 bill on the table. "One note," he said with a smirk. "Just one. If it sounds decent, it's yours." The table burst into laughter again. To them, it was just harmless fun, a dare, a little joke at the waitress's expense. But to Lena, it felt different. There was something in the way he said it, something that stirred a quiet mix of pride and discomfort inside her. She glanced at the piano. It had been years since she'd touched one. The last time she played, she was in a small recital hall, wearing a white dress and dreaming of becoming a concert pianist. That dream had ended quickly after her father's sudden death. The hospital bills, the rent, the endless need for money. Music had become a luxury she couldn't afford. Her heart started to race. She wanted to walk away, to pretend she hadn't heard him. But then she looked at that bill on the table. $100 could buy groceries for a week. It could cover part of her mother's medicine. The restaurant manager noticed what was happening and hurried over. "Mr. Davenport," he said in a careful tone, "we don't usually allow staff to—" Charles waved him off. It's just a bit of fun, relax. One note, that's all. Lena looked at her manager, then at the guests, then at the piano. A strange quiet had settled over the area, with nearby tables watching the scene unfold. She took a slow breath. Just one note? She asked softly. Charles nodded, amused. That's all. Just one note. She hesitated for a moment longer, then carefully untied her apron and set it aside on a nearby chair. Her hands trembled slightly as she walked toward the piano. The sound of her shoes on the polished floor seemed louder than usual, echoing in the still air. As she sat down on the bench, she brushed a bit of dust off the keys. They were cold under her fingers. For a moment, memories came flooding back. Her old teacher's voice, the sound of applause, the way her father used to close his eyes when she played at home. She blinked quickly, pushing those memories away. Charles leaned back, arms crossed, a smirk still on his face. All right then, he said. Let's hear your famous note. The room went quiet. Even the waiters had stopped moving. The only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioner. Lena placed her right hand on the keys. Her fingers hovered for a second, trembling slightly, then pressed down a single note, a soft, gentle A. The sound lingered in the air, simple and clear. Something about it felt alive. She sat there listening, her eyes half closed. Then, before she even realized it, her other hand moved to join in. Another note. Then another. The melody began to take shape, as if her hands remembered what her mind had forgotten. For that brief moment, she wasn't a waitress anymore. She was the girl who loved music, the girl who used to dream. Charles's smirk faded as the sound filled the room. His dinner guests stopped whispering. The nearby tables turned their heads. The restaurant, once buzzing with chatter, had gone completely silent. And though she had only been asked to play one note, Lena knew there was no going back now. She didn't know it yet. But that moment, those first few notes, would change her life in ways she could never have imagined. Lena's fingers hovered above the piano keys for a long second before she pressed another note. The sound was soft, almost shy, but it carried through the quiet room like a whisper that everyone could hear. The laughter that had filled the restaurant only moments ago faded away. It was as if the whole place was holding its breath. Charles leaned forward, his smile faltering just a little. He had expected a quick, awkward sound and maybe another round of laughter. But the note she played wasn't random. It carried emotion, like it came from somewhere deep inside her. He couldn't explain it, but something about the sound made him pause. Lena didn't plan to play anything more. She really hadn't. But once her fingers touched the piano, something inside her woke up. It was like her body remembered what her heart had tried to forget. Her hands began to move slowly, finding keys that felt familiar, piecing together a melody that had once lived inside her. Each note came out softer, stronger, clearer. The restaurant was silent except for the sound of the piano. Waiters stopped mid-step. Customers turned their heads, and even the kitchen door stayed still. The melody filled every corner of the room. It was tender, full of sadness and beauty. It felt like a memory being told without words. Lena closed her eyes as she played. The fear she had felt when she first sat down began to fade. For the first time in years, she didn't feel tired or invisible. She wasn't the waitress running from table to table, or the girl counting tips to pay rent. In that moment, she was the musician she once dreamed of being. Charles sat completely still. His friends exchanged surprised looks, unsure what to say. The man who had dared her to play now looked almost embarrassed. This wasn't the joke he thought it would be. He couldn't take his eyes off her, and he wasn't the only one. Everyone in the restaurant seemed caught in the same spell. Lena's fingers moved faster, her body swaying slightly with the rhythm. The song wasn't one she had learned from a book. It was something she made up as she went along, guided by feeling more than memory. It was gentle but powerful, like the kind of music that could make a person remember something they thought they'd forgotten. Some people smiled softly, others wiped at their eyes. When she finally stopped, the silence that followed felt even louder than the music had been. She opened her eyes slowly, her breath unsteady. For a moment, she forgot where she was. The restaurant, the guests, the dare, all of it disappeared. Then she saw the faces turn toward her. Every person in the room was watching. Charles blinked a few times before he realized he hadn't spoken. His business partners looked stunned. One of them whispered, "That was incredible." The manager, who had been standing nearby the whole time, finally found his voice. "Lena," he said softly, "I didn't know you could play like that." Lena looked down at the keys and smiled weakly. "I didn't either. Not anymore." Then she stood, smoothed her uniform, and tried to go back to work. But before she could walk away, the sound of applause filled the room. It started softly, one or two people clapping, and then the whole restaurant joined in. Even the kitchen staff stepped out to see what had happened. For a few seconds, it felt like the world had stopped just for her. Charles stood too, his face a mixture of pride and shame. He reached for his wallet again and placed a few more bills on the piano. "You've earned much more than that," he said, his tone softer now. "That was something special?" Lena shook her head. "Thank you, sir, but it was just a song." "No," he said, "it wasn't." He tried to say more, but she simply nodded and went back to her tables, her cheeks still warm with emotion. The applause continued even after she disappeared into the kitchen. The night went on, but nothing felt the same after that. The men at Charles's table were quieter, their laughter replaced by quiet conversation. Charles himself kept glancing at the piano, lost in thought. He couldn't stop thinking about the look on her face while she played. It wasn't just talent. There was a story behind those notes, something that money couldn't buy. Later, when the dinner ended and the guests had left, Charles stayed behind for a moment. The restaurant had emptied out and the lights were dimmed. Lena was stacking chairs and wiping tables. He walked up to her carefully, not wanting to startle her. "You know," he said, "I've heard music in some of the best halls in Europe. But that," he paused, "that was different." Lena smiled politely but kept working. "Thank you, sir. I'm glad you enjoyed it." He hesitated. "Do you play anywhere? Or did you used to?" She looked at him for a moment, her eyes soft but tired. "I used to," she said quietly. "A long time ago," he nodded slowly. "You shouldn't have stopped." She didn't answer right away. "Sometimes life decides things for you." There was something about the way she said it that stayed with him. It wasn't bitterness, just honesty. He wanted to say something kind, but he didn't know how. He wasn't used to feeling small, but in that moment he did. "If you ever want to play again," he said finally, "you should. You really should." Lena gave a small smile. "Maybe one day." After he left, she stood for a moment beside the piano. The lights were dim and the restaurant was quiet again. She ran her fingers over the keys one last time. They felt warm now, as if the music still lived inside them. Then she closed the lid and went back to work. That night, when she got home, she sat on the edge of her bed, still thinking about what had happened. Her hand still tingled from the keys. For the first time in years, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. She looked at her mother's photo on the nightstand and whispered, "I played again, Mom." She didn't know that someone had recorded her playing on their phone. A customer at one of the nearby tables had captured the whole thing. Before the night was over, the video would begin spreading online, and by morning, people across the city would be talking about the waitress who played the piano and left a room full of rich men speechless. But Lena didn't know that yet. All she knew was that for one night she had felt alive again. The next morning, the sun came through Lena's small apartment window, waking her up earlier than usual. She rubbed her eyes and sat on the edge of her bed, still thinking about the night before. It felt like a dream. One of those moments that seemed too special to be real. She could still hear the music in her head, the soft notes echoing like a memory that refused to fade. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. She picked it up, expecting a message from her manager about her shift. But what she saw made her freeze. There were dozens of notifications, messages from coworkers, unknown numbers, and even a few from people she hadn't spoken to in years. One message said, "Is this you in the video?" Another said, "You're amazing." Confused, she clicked on a link someone had sent. It opened a short video posted on social media. The title read, "Waitress plays piano after a rich man dares her, leaves everyone speechless." Her heart raced as she hit play. The video showed her sitting at the piano, nervous at first, then slowly letting go as the music filled the room. The camera caught the faces of the guests, their surprise, their silence, and then the applause. It had already been shared thousands of times. Comments filled the screen, people from everywhere writing things like, "This gave me chills," and "Talent never dies." Lena covered her mouth in disbelief. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She had never wanted attention, and now it seemed the entire internet knew her name, Part of her felt proud, but another part felt exposed. That moment had been private to her, something she hadn't meant to share with the world. Her phone rang. It was the restaurant manager. "Lena," he said, sounding half excited, half worried. "You're trending. Everyone's calling the restaurant asking about you." "About me?" she asked softly. "Yes. Reporters, local news, even a few music people. They want to know your story." He paused. "Listen, you should come in early today. The owner wants to talk to you." When she arrived at work, things felt different. People she barely knew smiled at her. Some clapped when she walked in. A few customers pointed and whispered. It made her a little uncomfortable, but she smiled politely and thanked them. The piano sat in the same corner, looking exactly as it had before, but it no longer felt like just a decoration. It was now part of her story. The restaurant owner, a kind older man, called her into his office. "Lena," he said, "you brought more attention to this place than any advertisement ever could. I've been getting calls all morning. People want to book tables just to see the piano waitress." He chuckled softly. "I hope that doesn't bother you." She shook her head. "It's just a bit overwhelming, that's all." He nodded. "I understand. But I also think this could be something good for you. If you ever want to play here officially, I'll make sure you get paid for it." Her heart skipped. "You mean like a real pianist?" "Exactly," he said with a smile. "No more dares. Just you and the music." Lena didn't know what to say. She had dreamed of playing professionally once, but that dream had died a long time ago. Yet somehow life was handing her another chance. She thanked him and promised to think about it. Later that afternoon, while serving lunch, she noticed Charles walk in. He wasn't wearing his usual fancy suit, just a simple shirt and coat. He looked different, less confident, maybe even a little unsure. When he saw her, he smiled awkwardly. "I hope I'm not causing trouble showing up again." Lena shook her head. "Not at all." He glanced at the piano, then back at her. "You've been all over the internet, you know. I saw the video this morning." "I can't stop thinking about it," she smiled faintly. "I didn't know someone recorded it." He nodded. "Neither did I, but maybe it's a good thing. People need to hear something real once in a while." She didn't reply, but she appreciated his words. He ordered a coffee and sat quietly at his table. He wasn't acting like the loud, confident man from the night before. Something in him had changed too. After a few minutes, he stood and walked over to her. "Listen," he said, "I don't usually do this, but I know a few people in the music business. If you ever want help getting back into it, I could make some calls." "No strings attached," Lena was surprised. She wasn't sure whether to accept. "That's kind of you," she said, "but I don't know if I'm ready for that." He nodded understandingly. "I get it. Just know the offer stands." Then he smiled. "And for what it's worth, I'm sorry for the way I acted last night. It was childish. You taught me something about humility." Lena looked at him, sensing sincerity in his voice. "Thank you," she said softly. "That means a lot." After he left, she stood by the piano for a moment, touching the keys again. She wondered if maybe life had been waiting for the right time to bring her back to this. For so long she had seen music as something she'd lost, but maybe she hadn't lost it. It had just been waiting for her to find it again. That evening, as the dinner crowd filled the restaurant, people began asking if she would play. At first she hesitated, but the owner encouraged her. "Go on, Lena, play something. They've all been waiting for you." She sat at the piano, nervous again, but this time the fear felt different. It wasn't about being judged. It was about sharing something she loved. She started playing slowly, her fingers remembering each note as if no time had passed. The melody was soft and full of feeling, the kind that made people stop talking and just listen. A young couple held hands as they listened. An older woman at a nearby table smiled through tears. Even the servers paused between orders, watching her play. It was as if her music reached a place in everyone that words couldn't. When she finished, the restaurant filled with applause again. She smiled shyly, bowing her head slightly before returning to her work. But something had changed. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was an artist again. Later that night, after everyone left, she sat alone at the piano, thinking about everything that had happened in just 24 hours. The video, the attention, Charles's apology, it all felt unreal. She pressed a single note, letting it ring out softly in the empty room. That one sound seemed to hold everything she felt: hope, fear, gratitude, and a quiet promise to herself. "I'm not done yet," she whispered. As she turned off the lights and walked home, she passed a small group of people standing outside talking excitedly. One of them pointed at her and said, "That's her. That's the waitress from the video." They smiled and waved, and she waved back shyly, her heart full. That night she couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the way people had reacted to her music. For years she had believed that her talent no longer mattered, that it was buried under bills and responsibility. But now she realized something. People didn't need perfection. They needed emotion, and that was something she had plenty of. The next day, a local news crew called the restaurant asking if they could do an interview. The owner asked her if she wanted to do it. She hesitated at first, but then agreed. If her story could inspire even one person not to give up on their dreams, it would be worth it. When the reporter asked her how it felt to become famous overnight, Lena smiled softly. "I'm not famous," she said. "I'm just someone who got a little reminder of what she loves." The reporter asked if she planned to pursue music again. She looked down for a moment, thinking. "Maybe," she said finally. "Maybe it's time to stop hiding from it." That interview aired that evening, and before long more people began reaching out. A local music teacher offered to help her practice. A small community theater invited her to perform. It wasn't about fame or fortune. It was about finding herself again. For the first time in a long while, Lena felt that life was beginning to move in the right direction. The dare that started as a joke had turned into something real. One note had opened a door she thought was closed forever, and deep inside she knew this was only the beginning. A week had passed since the night Lena played the piano at the restaurant, but the world still hadn't stopped talking about her. Every day someone new came in hoping to see her play again. Reporters left business cards at the counter, and customers asked for photos. It was strange and overwhelming, but also a little magical. Lena tried to stay grounded, but deep inside something was changing. For the first time in years, she began to believe that maybe her dream wasn't gone after all. The restaurant owner encouraged her to play every evening before dinner service began. "Just a few songs," he would say with a smile. "It makes the place feel alive," and he was right. The soft sound of the piano filled the room and gave it warmth. People came not only for the food, but for the feeling that the music brought. One afternoon, while she was setting up tables, the restaurant phone rang. The manager called her over. "Lena," he said, "someone's asking for you." She took the phone hesitantly. "Hello? Miss Morales?" The voice on the other end was calm and professional. "My name is David Reynolds. I'm a music producer based in New York. I saw the video of you playing last week. It was breathtaking. I was wondering if you've ever considered recording your music." Lena almost dropped the phone. "Recording? No, sir, I haven't. I haven't played seriously in years." "That's exactly why it's special," he said. "There's real emotion in your playing. People can feel it. If you're interested, I'd like to invite you to our studio. No pressure, just a conversation." Lena didn't know what to say. She had dreamed of an opportunity like this once, but now that it was here, it didn't feel real. "I don't know," she said softly. "I'll have to think about it." "Of course," he replied kindly. "Take your time. My assistant will send you the details." When she hung up, she just stood there, the phone still in her hand. Her coworkers looked at her curiously, but she could barely speak. She had just been offered a chance to step into a world she thought she'd lost forever. That evening, as she played her usual set at the restaurant, she couldn't stop thinking about the call. Each note felt heavier with meaning. What if this was her chance to finally do what she was meant to do? But then the fear crept in. The bills, her mother's treatment, the long hours she still needed to work. Could she really leave all that behind for a dream that might not last? After closing time, she stayed behind to clean. Charles walked in again just as she was wiping the tables. He had been visiting the restaurant often lately, always sitting quietly and listening to her play. This time he carried a small envelope. "I didn't mean to interrupt," he said gently. "I just wanted to give you this." She took the envelope and opened it carefully. Inside was a check made out to her mother's name. It was enough to cover her medical bills for months. She looked up in shock. "I can't take this," she said immediately. "It's not charity," he replied softly. "Consider it a thank you for reminding me what's real. You gave me something that money can't buy." Her eyes filled with tears. "I don't know how to thank you." "You already have," he said, smiling. "Just promise me one thing." "Don't stop playing," she nodded slowly, her heart full. "I promise." The next morning she made her decision. She called the number the producer had given her. "Mr. Reynolds," she said, her voice steady. "I'd like to come to New York." He sounded delighted. "That's wonderful news, Lena. We'll arrange everything for you." Within days, she was on a bus heading to New York City. She stared out the window as the miles rolled by, nervous but excited. It had been years since she'd left her hometown, and now she was traveling not for work, but for something that belonged to her. Her mother hugged her tightly before she left, saying, "Go make the world hear what I've always known." When she arrived at the studio, she was overwhelmed. The walls were lined with gold records, and people hurried through the halls carrying instruments and cables. David greeted her with a warm smile and introduced her to the sound engineer, a kind man named Paul. They led her to a room with a grand piano sitting under soft lights. "Take your time," David said. "Play whatever feels right." Lena sat down, her hands trembling slightly. She took a deep breath and began to play. The melody was slow, filled with emotion, a reflection of everything she had been through, the loss, the struggle, and the rediscovery of her dream. When she finished, there was silence in the room. David nodded slowly. "That," he said, "was beautiful. We'll start recording tomorrow." Over the next few days, she worked harder than she ever had before. The long hours didn't bother her. She was doing what she loved. The producer helped her shape her music into something that still felt honest but polished. Each song told a part of her story, and she poured her whole heart into it. Back at the restaurant, people talked about her constantly. "Our Lena's going to be famous," the cook said proudly. The owner smiled whenever customers asked about her. "She deserves it," he said. "Every bit of it." When Lena finally returned home 2 weeks later, she felt different. She wasn't just a waitress anymore, she was an artist again. She walked through her apartment, noticing how the light fell through the curtains. For once, life didn't feel heavy. It felt full of promise. That night, Charles called. "How was New York?" he asked. "It was everything I dreamed of," she said. "They want to release my recordings next month." He smiled through the phone. "I'm not surprised. The world needs to hear you." They talked for a while about the future, about music, about how quickly life can change. When they hung up, Lena sat quietly smiling to herself. The world had opened up again, and she was ready to step into it. A few weeks later, her first performance was scheduled at a local theater. It wasn't a huge venue, but it was enough to make her heart race. She practiced every day, sometimes late into the night. When the day finally arrived, she stood backstage, peeking through the curtain. The seats were filled. Friends, co-workers, her mother, even Charles. Everyone who had believed in her was there. The lights dimmed and she walked onto the stage. The applause was loud, but she didn't let it overwhelm her. She sat at the piano, closed her eyes, and took a deep breath. Then she began to play. The music flowed from her hands effortlessly, each note carrying a piece of her soul. The crowd was silent, completely captivated. Some people cried quietly. Others simply smiled and swayed. Even Charles, sitting in the front row, had tears in his eyes. When she finished, the applause was thunderous. People stood up clapping and cheering. Lena looked out at them, overwhelmed with gratitude. This was the moment she had dreamed of for so long, the moment she thought she'd never have again. After the show, people lined up to congratulate her. The theater buzzed with excitement. But the best moment came when her mother walked up to her, her eyes filled with tears. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered, hugging her tightly. "You did it," Lena smiled through her own tears. "We did it, Mom." That night, as she packed up her music sheets, she felt peace. The road ahead was still uncertain, but she no longer feared it. She had faced her doubts, her struggles, and her past, and she had turned them into something beautiful. The wealthy man's dare had started as a careless game, but it ended up changing both their lives forever. And as Lena left the theater that night, she knew one thing for sure. Sometimes it takes just one note to remind the world who you really are. The night after her performance, Lena could hardly sleep. Her heart was still full from the applause, the music, and the faces of everyone who had come to see her. It felt unreal, like she had stepped into someone else's life. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw her mother's proud smile, heard the sound of the audience clapping, and felt the warmth of the stage lights on her skin. The next morning, her phone buzzed nonstop. Messages poured in from people she didn't even know. Messages of love, encouragement, and admiration. One person wrote, You made me believe in dreams again. Another said, your story gave me courage. Lena read each one slowly, tears filling her eyes. It was overwhelming, but in the best way. She had never imagined her music could touch so many lives. When she arrived at the restaurant later that day, her co-workers greeted her with cheers. Someone had taped a small poster near the entrance with the words, "Our star pianist," written in big letters. Lena blushed, laughing softly. You guys are too much, she said. But deep down she felt happy. She had spent so long feeling invisible, and now people were seeing her for who she truly was. The restaurant was busier than ever. People from all over came hoping to catch a glimpse of her, to hear her play even for a few minutes. The owner had even arranged a small piano performance twice a week, where Lena could share her music freely. Each time she played, she saw faces light up, families smiling, children watching in awe, couples holding hands. It reminded her why she had fallen in love with music in the first place. One afternoon, as she was setting up the piano for the evening, Charles walked in again. He was carrying a bouquet of white lilies. Congratulations, he said with a warm smile. You were incredible on that stage, Lena smiled back. Thank you. You didn't have to bring flowers. I wanted to, he said simply. That night, the dare, it still haunts me. I thought I was being clever, but now I realize how wrong I was. You taught me something that night. She tilted her head slightly. What's that? That sometimes, he said, the people we overlook are the ones with the most to teach us. His words touched her. They talked for a while about her music, her mother, and how much life had changed. Charles confessed that he had started funding a small charity program that supported young musicians who couldn't afford lessons. You inspired it, he admitted. I wanted to give others the chance you almost lost. Lena felt tears sting her eyes. That's beautiful, she said softly. I'm glad something good came from that night. As the weeks passed, more opportunities started to appear. A local radio station invited her to perform live on air. A small record label offered to release her first collection of piano pieces. Even a few schools asked if she could visit and talk to their students about following their dreams. Every time she said yes, she reminded herself of how it all began, with one note and a dare. Despite the new attention, Lena stayed humble. She still worked at the restaurant a few days a week, still helped her mother, and still played at local community events. She didn't want fame to change her. She wanted to stay connected to the people who had supported her from the start. One evening, after finishing her set at the restaurant, a young girl approached her. She looked about 10 years old and held a small notebook in her hands. Miss Lena, she said shyly, I want to play piano like you one day. Lena smiled warmly. That's wonderful. Do you take lessons? The girl shook her head. We can't afford them right now. But I listen to music every day. Lena knelt down and smiled gently. Keep listening and never stop dreaming. Music finds its way to people who love it enough. She reached into her bag and took out a small keychain shaped like a piano. Here, she said. For good luck. The girl's face lit up. Thank you, she said, hugging it tightly. After she left, Lena sat for a moment thinking. Maybe this was her purpose, to share her gift, to remind people not to give up. She didn't just want to play music. She wanted to use it to make people believe again. The next few months were a blur of work, performances, and interviews. But through it all, she kept her feet on the ground. She never forgot where she started, never forgot the nights she had walked home tired and worried about bills. That memory kept her grateful, even as her name started appearing in newspapers and online articles. One evening, as she prepared for another local concert, her manager received a call from a famous symphony director. He had seen her video and wanted to invite her to perform at a charity gala in the city. It's a big event, he said. Celebrities, business leaders, even the mayor will be there. Lena felt a rush of nerves. I don't know if I'm ready for that, she admitted. Her manager smiled. You're more than ready. The night of the gala arrived. The hall was elegant, filled with chandeliers and people dressed in their finest clothes. Lena wore a simple white gown, her hair neatly tied back. She wasn't there to impress with glamour. She was there to play from the heart. As she stepped onto the stage, the crowd fell silent. She could feel hundreds of eyes on her, but she didn't let it shake her. She looked out into the audience and saw Charles sitting near the front, smiling proudly. When she placed her fingers on the keys, everything else disappeared. The music flowed naturally, each note carrying the story of her journey, from the restaurant to the video to this very stage. People listened in awe, moved not just by her skill but by her sincerity. Some closed their eyes, others held hands, and a few wiped away tears. When the last note faded, there was a pause, a long, breathless moment, before the room erupted in applause. People stood up, clapping and cheering. Lena smiled, bowing gracefully. For her, this wasn't just about success. It was about healing, growth, and the magic of following one's heart. After the show, as guests mingled and congratulated her, Charles approached with a small envelope. "For you," he said quietly. She opened it and found a note that read, "The night you played that first note, you didn't just change your life. You changed mine too." "Thank you." She looked up, smiling. "You don't need to thank me," she said softly. "Sometimes life just brings people together for a reason." He nodded, his eyes warm. "You're right, and I'm glad it did." Over time, Lena's name became known across the city. She continued to perform, but she also used her platform to help others. She started a small foundation that offered free music lessons for children from low-income families. Every time she walked into a classroom filled with bright-eyed kids eager to learn, she saw a reflection of herself, the girl who once had a dream but almost lost it. Years later, people still remembered the story of the waitress who was dared to play the piano. It became a story of hope, of unexpected beginnings, of how a single moment can change everything. Lena never forgot that night or the man who unknowingly set her journey in motion. Every time she played the song she had played that night, she smiled, remembering where it all began. Her music continued to touch lives far and wide. Concert halls, radio stations, and online platforms all carried her sound. But to Lena, success wasn't about fame. It was about connection. Every melody she played was a piece of her heart, a reminder that dreams can sleep, but they never truly die. And as she sat at her piano one quiet evening, the lights dimmed and the world outside hushed. She pressed that same single note, the one that started it all. The sound filled the room, gentle and pure. She smiled, whispering to herself, "It all began here." Sometimes one note, one act of courage is all it takes to change a life. And for Lena, it changed the world around her too. Years had passed since the night Lena's fingers touched the piano in that small restaurant. The world had changed around her, but the memory of that single note, the one that had silenced a room, never faded. It became more than a memory. It became her story, her symbol, and her message to anyone who ever felt unseen. Lena had now performed in some of the most beautiful concert halls around the world. Her music had reached people she would never meet in person, listeners from small towns, busy cities, and distant countries. Yet no matter where she went, she always carried a piece of that restaurant with her. The sound of clinking dishes, the smell of freshly brewed coffee, and the laughter of her co-workers who had once believed in her before anyone else did. One morning, she woke up to a letter from a well-known orchestra director inviting her to perform at an international charity concert in Paris. The event would raise funds to build schools and music programs for children in underprivileged communities. It was the kind of event that spoke directly to her heart. Without hesitation, she said yes. A few days later, she stood at the airport, her mother by her side. Her mother's health had improved over the years, and she now walked with a gentle steadiness that made Lena smile. "Are you sure you'll be all right while I'm gone?" Lena asked softly. Her mother laughed. "You worry too much. Go and share your gift. I'll be watching the concert on TV." Lena hugged her tightly. "I love you." "I love you more," her mother whispered. The flight to Paris was long, but Lena didn't mind. She spent most of it looking out the window, lost in thought. Every milestone in her journey flashed through her mind. The night of the dare, the first standing ovation, the moment she realized music could change lives. She didn't know what life would bring next, but she felt grateful for every twist and turn that had led her here. When she arrived in Paris, she was greeted by the concert organizers. The city was breathtaking, full of history and art. But what touched her most was the rehearsal space, a large hall with high ceilings and a grand piano waiting at the center. As soon as she touched the keys, she felt at home. Music didn't need translation. It spoke one language, the language of the heart. The night of the concert arrived. The hall was packed, filled with people from all walks of life. artists, diplomats, musicians, and children from the very schools the event would help build. The energy in the air was electric. Lena stood backstage dressed in a simple black gown, her hands clasped together. She took a deep breath and whispered a small prayer of thanks before stepping out into the light. The applause was warm and welcoming. She bowed and sat at the piano, letting the silence settle before she began. Her first song was one of her oldest compositions, the same melody she had played at the restaurant that night years ago. The audience listened closely as her fingers moved gently across the keys, weaving together emotions that words could never express. Every note told a piece of her journey, hope, loss, courage, and the rediscovery of purpose. As she played, she thought about the people who had shaped her story, the kind restaurant owner who encouraged her, the producer who believed in her, the young girl who wanted to learn piano, and of course Charles, the man whose careless dare had started it all. She hadn't seen him in years, but she knew he had continued his charity work, helping countless young musicians find their path. Their lives had gone in different directions, but their connection through that moment remained unbroken. When she finished her performance, the audience stood and applauded. The hall echoed with cheers, but Lena stayed seated for a moment, smiling softly as she looked out into the crowd. She didn't play for fame anymore. She played to remind people that every heart has a song waiting to be heard. After the concert, reporters surrounded her, asking questions about her journey and what message she wanted to give to others. She thought for a moment before answering. Sometimes life gives us challenges that make us forget who we are, she said. But one small act, one single moment of courage can bring everything back. Music did that for me, and I hope it can do that for others too. The following day, she visited one of the schools that the charity event supported. The children were waiting eagerly, their eyes wide with excitement. Some of them had never seen a grand piano before. Lena sat with them, teaching simple melodies and laughing as they tried to follow along. One boy asked, "Miss, were you always famous?" She smiled. "No, not at all. I used to serve coffee and clean tables. But one night I played a song and everything changed." The children listened closely as she told them her story, not as a tale of fame, but as a story about believing in yourself even when no one else does. When she finished, a little girl said quietly, "I want to be like you." Lena smiled warmly. Be like yourself and that will be enough. When she returned home, she was greeted by her mother's embrace and the familiar warmth of their small home. The walls were now decorated with photos of her travels and performances, but the piano in the corner remained the same, old, worn, and beautiful. It was where everything had begun, and every time she sat there she felt grounded again. That evening there was a knock on her door. When she opened it, she froze in surprise. It was Charles. Time had softened his features, but his eyes still held the same kindness she remembered. "Hello, Lena," he said with a small smile. "I was in town for a conference. I heard about your concert in Paris. You were incredible." She stepped aside to let him in. "I can't believe you came." He looked around, taking in the simple, cozy room. "I had to see for myself how far you've come." "Do you ever think about that night?" "All the time," she admitted. "It feels like a lifetime ago," he nodded. "That night changed me too. It made me realize that sometimes we find grace in the most unexpected moments." They talked for hours, catching up on the years they had missed. There was no bitterness, no regret, just quiet gratitude. When he finally stood to leave, he paused at the door. "I'm proud of you," he said. "You've given hope to so many." She smiled softly. "Thank you. But I think we both learned something that night, that everyone deserves a chance to be seen." He nodded, tipping his head before walking away into the night. As she watched him go, Lena felt a deep peace. Some people come into your life for a reason, she thought, and sometimes their purpose is to remind you of your own. That night she sat at her piano once more. The room was quiet. The city lights flickered softly outside. She placed her hands on the keys and began to play. Not for an audience, not for recognition, but for herself. The melody drifted through the room like a whisper from the past, gentle and full of heart. As the final note faded, she looked up at the sky through the window. "Thank you," she whispered, "to life, to music, and to every person who had been part of her journey." Years later, her story continued to inspire new generations. People still talked about the waitress who played one note that silenced a room. Her name became a symbol of hope, a reminder that no dream is ever too far away, and that sometimes the smallest moments can lead to the greatest changes. And somewhere in a small restaurant, a young waitress wiped down tables after a long shift. She noticed an old piano in the corner, untouched and dusty. Curiosity got the better of her, and she pressed one single key. The note echoed softly through the empty room. A few customers turned their heads, smiling faintly. Something about that sound felt special, like the beginning of a story waiting to be told. Maybe one day she too would find her own melody. Because life has a way of repeating its miracles for those brave enough to play their first note.